Hi there, my name is Sam Marilich, and today we're going to talk about how to hire your first salesperson. Now, before we get into that, you might be asking, who am I? What do I know? Why should you listen to me? So I've been recruiting salespeople for B2B SaaS startups since August 2016. I've hired more than 130 of these people at over 40 different companies, and I've talked to thousands of salespeople. In the process, I started my own recruiting agency. These are some of the startups that I've helped hire. And then, these startups are backed by tier one investors. You may share some of these investors. So a couple of companies that I've worked with that you may have heard of, Samsara, they're currently publicly traded. I worked with them after they raised their Series A. There's Front, they're a Series D company with a $1.7 billion valuation. I worked with them after they raised their Series B. There's Everlaw, which is currently a Series D as well. They're at a $2 billion valuation. I worked with them after they raised their Series A. And then there's Epsagon, which was acquired by Cisco for $500 million in cash. I worked with them as they built their first US sales team. The point that I'm trying to make here is, these companies are big now. They've gone on to a lot of success, but 99% of the time, the companies that I'm working with are entirely unknown in the market. So the best candidates are not applying directly to these companies or even asking their friends for referrals because they simply don't know that these companies exist. So if you're thinking, well, hey, that's all good and well, but I don't have a big employer brand, that's all right. That is the kind of space that I have played in. It's the kind of space that we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about the process that we use to build a pipeline of ideal candidates so that you're not leaving things up to chance. So who is this for? This is for founders and leaders of B2B software startups. And there is the warning here. If you get your first sales hire wrong, it's going to cost you at least 100 grand and 6 months of progress. This is before we make up a number about like opportunity cost, but the opportunity cost is real. Look, if you do this right, you could be looking at a competitive Series A where the best venture capitalists are chasing you. They've got great term sheets in hand. But if you do this wrong, you're going to watch your competitors race past you. You're going to struggle to attract any investor interest because your growth numbers are bad, right? That's the entire game. That's the whole rocket ship analogy. So the format to this document, very elementary. We're going to ask who, what, when, and where. I figure you've already got a pretty solid why. I don't think we need to talk about that. But we'll start off, when should you hire your first salesperson? So the rule of thumb here is $500,000 in ARR. So you need to be at or nearly at 500,000 in ARR before it makes sense to think about hiring a salesperson. Now, maybe you have a product that is expensive and sold into the enterprise. It does not matter, right? This is a common excuse that founders like to make when they don't want to do the selling themselves, but you have to do the early sales yourself. Like, that's just the reality of it. You need to be in this ballpark before you are big enough to delegate away the role. So, flowchart, do we bring on a salesperson? Well, are you at 500,000 or more in ARR? Yes, hire someone. No, not yet. If you're at 450, sure, go for it. If you're at 250, you just need to do a few more deals. You might say, well, I don't want to do sales. Here's the bad news. Being a founder is a sales job. If you don't like that fact, you're going to have to go and find something else to do. Investors, employees, and customers are all constituencies that you're going to be selling into for as long as you're a founder. The good news is that people like talking to founders, and even if you aren't the most charismatic person, you have a really big advantage compared to the average salesperson. So this might be you today. I don't know how to sell, but this will be you in a very short time frame. The harsh reality is that a lot of SaaS companies are selling solutions that are in search of a problem. Now, you need to be doing the initial sales calls. You need to work out the objections that your market will have. One question I always recommend salespeople ask before they join a company is, if it were your own corporate budget for this specific problem, would you buy the product? And for a lot of companies, the answer is no. They're solving an imaginary problem. So that's just something that, again, getting that customer feedback is going to be really useful. So 3 important reasons that you need to do the first sales yourself. The first one is that good salespeople will not join companies with $0 in ARR. The second one is that hiring a salesperson is expensive in both money and time. And the third one is that doing selling is going to help you improve your marketing and product. So let's go into these in detail. The first one, good salespeople do not join companies with no money in ARR. Now, if you have previously sold a company for more than $1 billion, or you have taken a company public before, disregard my advice. Go and do it your own way. But 99.9% of people reading this will not have done either of these things, and you need to take the salesperson's point of view here. So let's think about that salesperson's point of view. Founders have years to figure out product market fit. Salespeople get fired after a few bad quarters or even less. Salespeople have a number or a quota that they need to hit, and this has a direct correlation to how much they personally earn. Good salespeople recognize this reality. Good salespeople also have the option to work at companies where product market fit has already been established. In 99% of cases, the kind of salesperson who will join a startup with no revenue and founders who haven't had an enormous track record beforehand is not the sort of salesperson that you want to hire. If you've ever seen Glengarry Glen Ross, that's what this GIF is from. If you haven't seen it, it's a great sales movie. The second piece, hiring a salesperson is expensive in both money and time. In 80% of cases, the ideal first salesperson is a mid-market account executive. You want to hire 2 of them. In a few moments, we're going to go through why mid-market account executives are usually the best persona to hire in a first sales role and why you want to hire 2. But for now, let's just look at the costs. So we've got a base salary of $100K. We've got a recruiting cost of $25K. Now that might be a bit less if you do it yourself, but again, you have to think about the value of your time. There's health insurance and payroll taxes. There's tools, and then there's office space. So all of that gets up to $180K. Now, if you're sharp with numbers, the costs are in black, but the total is $180K. That is because there is typically a ramp period of a few months. I've used 3 just because it's the most common period where a salesperson is going to get paid out their full on-target earnings, which is the amount that they would make if they hit 100% to plan. The third reason that you need to be doing sales is that doing sales is going to help you improve your product and marketing. So you're going to be learning the objections that customers have. That's going to help you with your marketing, and you're also going to get insight into what customers want built. This is going to help with your product. Look, if you don't want to do these things, just quit and go and work for a megacorp, because this is the strategy, this is the work, everything else is just playing business. If you've got 20 customers who are each spending an average of $20K a year, you're at like $400K in ARR, you're getting pretty close to the point where making a sales hire is a sensible next step. So we've covered kind of that initial. Let's talk about who the right person is. We're going to look at a few things. We'll talk about roles within a sales organization, why a sales leader isn't usually the right first hire, why SDRs aren't the right first hire, why mid-market reps are usually just right. We're going to talk about the delayed performance feedback loop. We're going to talk about why you need to hire 2. We'll talk about should you hire commission-only salespeople, and then we'll talk about should you hire from big successful companies, and then we're going to finish this section with the 3 pillars to early stage success. So roles within a sales organization. We've got the SDR who books meetings. We've got the account executive who books meetings and closes business. We've got the account manager who does upselling. We've got the customer success manager who's responsible for onboarding and implementation. And we've got the sales engineer who provides technical support for the account executive. Now, the important note is that sales team structures can vary a bit. Sometimes there isn't a sales engineer. Sometimes the CSM does upsells and renewals. Sometimes implementation is done by a solutions architect, but we are kind of putting the cart in front of the horse. At the earliest stages, right, we need to contact prospects, we need to run discovery calls, we need to run demos, we need to deal with non-technical and technical stakeholders, and we need to close the deal. Almost all of this can be done by an account executive. If we look at what an SDR can do versus an account executive, it's just a lot less, and we don't need to worry about post-sales until we have customers, right? So why a sales leader isn't usually the right first hire is that a VP of sales won't take you from 0 to 1. So you can bring on a VP of sales, early, but they're very expensive. They're $400,000 plus per year. By the time we add their base and their variable, they're not there to carry a bag. So yes, they'll help with account executives as they progress their own deals, but a VP of sales wants to manage a team. So you need to have validated your product with the market, $500,000 in ARR from founder-led sales, and you should ideally have at least 2, but even more than that, account executives working for you before you think about a VP of sales. So we've got these 3 phases of startup sales growth. We've got founder-led, 0 to 500K. We've got founder-managed, which is 500K plus. with your first 2 AEs hired. And then we've got VP led, where you've got at least 2 account executives on the team, and it's time to put your foot on the gas. It's time to scale up. Now, if you're at that founder managed kind of space, if you want to bring on like a head of sales, a player coach, that's totally fine. That's quite different to a VP of sales. Now, let's go to the other end of the spectrum and talk about SDRs. They're not the right first hire either, because SDRs are really useful for 2 things, right? So firstly, they're there for booking meetings, and then secondly, they are there for existing as a future talent pipeline. This becomes very important as your sales team grows in size, but it's not a problem yet. So if we look at the cost of an SDR, 60K base, 20K variable, 15K in recruiting costs, 10 grand in health insurance and payroll taxes, 12 grand for tools, and 6 grand for office space, 123K. So if we look at the cost of an account executive, it's not that much more. It's not really that much more, especially when we start looking at what you get. So let's assume you set a quota of 12 meetings per month and you have a 2-month ramp quota. For the sake of simplicity, we're going to assume that the SDR books no meetings during their ramp. And we're also going to assume, just like for simplicity of the exercise, that you're planning on promoting your SDRs into an account executive role. We're going to assume that this SDR hits quota 100% every single month after they come off their ramp. Now, over the course of the year, you're going to receive 120 meetings. Each meeting is going to cost you a little over $1,000. So those meetings may or may not have contributed to any deals closing. So $120,000 spent, a year spent, and you get 120 calls. Let's talk about what you get for your money with an account executive, right? Again, we're going to assume that this rep has a 3-month ramp. We don't expect them to close anything. After that, we're going to give them a full quota for the next 3 quarters. We're going to go with a standard 1-to-4 OTE to quota ratio. So if we're paying this rep $200,000 a year in base plus variable, we expect them to bring in $800,000 of net new recurring revenue. So if we follow this logic, we're going to assume that our account executive hits 100% to plan. They're going to have cost us $280,000, so $200,000 in terms of just what we've paid them, and then $80,000 in kind of like indirect employee costs. But this person has also brought in $600,000 in net new revenue. So, the bottom line, an account executive is the person you want to hire. The upfront cost is about 30% more, but they're a lot more effective, right? We've turned our $180,000 into $600,000 as opposed to just a bunch of qualified calls. Let's talk about why you need to hire 2 salespeople to start. So you're running an A/B test. Now, if you hire 1 rep and they do well, you don't know why. If you hire 1 rep and they do poorly, you also don't know why. There's the third outcome you want to avoid, which is when a rep is just doing okay. So imagine, you've hired a mid-market rep on an $800,000 quota. 18 months ago, they're at a $200,000 OTE. They're going to do $500,000 in net new revenue in their second year. So end of that year, they're at 62% to plan. But look, they fit in well with the team. There is a good argument for keeping them around and not putting them on a PIP. They're paying for themselves, and you can delude yourself that the $500K that they bring in does actually increase your exit value. But it doesn't, because you're creating a culture of complacency. And if you're a tech company and you're not growing dramatically year over year, you're just not going to get a good multiple at all. So you need a sales team performing, and you need a little bit of pressure. So the problem with hiring 1 rep to start: high performance, you don't know how to replicate it. Middling performance, you create a culture of complacency. Poor performance, it's hard to know why one person did poorly. Were they just lazy, or is there actually like deeper, more fundamental problems? So just a quick thing as well, there are 4 common titles for account executive. We've got SMB, mid-market, enterprise, and strategic. Now, these things sometimes have other names, mid-market sometimes called commercial, strategic sometimes called majors, but it's all pretty easy to work out. So average deal size, 5 to 30K for an SMB deal. It's pretty hard to make numbers work on average deals less than 10K if you actually have US-based salespeople. Mid-market reps, you want them to be doing a lot of $50,000 type deals, but really anywhere from like 30 to 80K. Enterprise AEs, we're looking at 80 to 150K plus. Typically, you want reps who have done $100,000 deals at that point. And then strategic AEs, usually you're wanting people who have done multi-hundred to multi-million-dollar deals. And then if we talk about OTE, And quota, pretty simple. With all of these numbers, I have just gone with take the number and then times it by 4. If you're a larger company, if you're further along, you can times it by 5. But if you want to be competitive at all with your compensation and you are earlier stage, you want to do a 4x. So for example, our enterprise AE with a 250K OTE has $1 million quota. Our strategic AE with a $300,000 OTE has a $1.2 million quota. If we bump that to a 350K OTE, it's probably like a $1.4 million quota. So why is a mid-market account executive just right? Well, they have much more experience than an SDR and they don't require as much help managing. They can work deals with relatively high velocity and they don't break the bank when it comes to the wage bill. So we're looking at someone with 2 to 4 years of sales experience and OTE of 180 to 220K. They're comfortable closing deals of 30 to 50K. They're comfortable doing their own outbound. This is really important. And they've got a track record of hitting quota. You also need to think about cash flow, right? So the nice thing about account executives versus SDRs is that variable compensation for an account executive is only paid out once new revenue has been booked. By comparison, SDR compensation is not explicitly tied to new revenue coming in. So because of this, it almost always makes sense to hire your first 2 and sometimes even your first 4 account executives before you think about adding SDRs. Now, there's also a delayed performance feedback loop that we're dealing with. So if you have a product that sells for 30 to 50K, you probably have a 3 to 6 month sales cycle. So even if you have hot leads ready to hand over to candidates on their first day, and not enough companies have this, it's still going to be 3+ months before you really start seeing revenue get closed. So that's another reason we want mid-market reps versus say like enterprise reps, because with an enterprise rep, you might be waiting a full year or more before you see a return on your investment, or that you have enough data to know that a candidate's not performing. I hate to say it, but there are a lot of enterprise salespeople out there who haven't closed a deal in 5+ years, and they can get away with it by jumping every 12 or so months. If you haven't hired salespeople before, you probably don't know what to avoid, and what to kind of look out for. Now let's talk about people who work at megacorps, right? So there are 3 enormous downsides to hiring salespeople from large companies. Number 1, these people are risk averse. Number 2, they're used to selling with a massive brand behind them. And number 3, they're very expensive. The way I think about B2B organizations is you need to put them more or less into one of 2 buckets. So there are enterprise sales organizations with enough money to sponsor F1 teams. These companies have billboards in international airports and all the like, Oracle, Citrix, if we look at this Formula One car here. Then there's everyone else. There's nothing wrong with these companies sponsoring these events. There's nothing wrong with them putting up big billboards, but just recognize that if you're getting advice from someone in that context, they are playing a very different game to you. So let's talk about the 3 pillars of early stage sales success. Those are being comfortable with iteration, being comfortable with ambiguity, and being team orientated. So the first one is being comfortable with iteration, because selling at early stages involves a lot of iterating. Who would have thought? So even though you've closed 500K or thereabouts in revenue, you're probably still working out a whole lot of product market fit. You're probably still working out your messaging. You're probably still working out your ideal customer profiles. So the wrong candidate is someone who needs a talk track and training on how to sell the product. Now, this, same person, if we had a team of 50, might be a perfect fit. I want you to picture in your mind the sort of person who rose through the ranks of Oracle's sales organization really quickly. Do you think that's the sort of person who asks for forgiveness rather than permission? Do you think it's someone who ran 100 experiments over 3 years in order to find perfect message market fit? I doubt it, right? That sort of behavior would get you fired so fast that your head would spin. Big companies have process. That's great. You'll get there too, especially as your company scales. But right now we're focused on building something that can eventually scale. Second thing, being comfortable with ambiguity. A lot of candidates have been burned over the last few years with startup riches. Savvy candidates are asking questions like, what was your team's performance last year? What is your win rate? And so on. These are actually really good questions, but they are questions you probably don't have data on just yet. Now, if you spend much time on LinkedIn and sales, you'll probably hear RepView being mentioned. RepView is a great site. It's like Glassdoor for sales teams. But you're not big enough to be on RepView because you don't have a sales team yet. Again, we're looking for a balance here. A candidate who doesn't ask any questions and isn't showing any level of skepticism isn't someone you want to hire. But again, this is why you need to have closed some sales before. That way you can answer specific questions, but you can also identify someone who's too skeptical, because this is a leap of faith for both sides. The third thing is you should be working together to solve the problem, right? So the way to think about this is you're trying to solve a problem. For example, you want to go from $500,000 in ARR to $2 million in ARR in the next 18 months. The right candidate is asking critical questions that helps them solve a similar problem. They're trying to work out how they'd close $800,000 in the next 12 months. You should be talking through this process with the candidate, and it should feel like a collaborative effort. Now, this is really important. Don't sell sales reps on being early sales hires. Founders often worry that they're going to make a mishire and accidentally bring on someone who really wants to work at a big company. But 9 times out of 10, you'll get on a call with a candidate, and one of two things will happen. So the first one is the candidate will tell you, hey, I'm really excited to work at an early stage company. I want to build processes. I want to be part of a founding team. One day I want to start my own business. One day I want to start my own startup. I've been at a startup before. We were at 20 people when I joined. We're at 800 people now. I miss the early days. I miss the camaraderie. So that's like the ideal kind of candidate. The second kind of candidate will ask all sorts of questions about quota attainment. What does the territory look like? What sort of resources do I have? What kind of proof can you show me? Now, the conventional sales wisdom is to handle the objections of the second candidate. But I think it's wrong, because all of their questions are legitimate. We're not making moral judgment here. This person is just the wrong person for this role. You don't want to hire them as an early member of your team. In 18 months, they might be a great hire to add. So, how do we hire someone? Well, you've got 4 options. You can do job ads, you can hire an internal recruiter, you can hire an external recruiting agency, and you can source candidates yourself. We'll start with job ads. So, they're the easiest option. We've got pros: cheap, simple, lots of candidates. We've got cons: you can't control who applies, the best candidates won't apply, and sifting through applicants takes a long time. This is a job ad I ran in August 2023. It was up for 4 days. So if we looked at every single person that applied for 30 seconds, which isn't a huge amount of time, we would have burnt 7 hours looking at profiles, and that's actually what I did. So if you do decide to run job ads, there are 3 websites I would use. Work at a startup if you're a YC-backed company, LinkedIn, Handshake if you are hiring college graduates as SDRs. I actually think if you are hiring SDRs, running job ads is the best way to do it. I wouldn't touch it for any other role. You're not going to find experienced SaaS reps on Indeed, Monster, ZipRecruiter, Dice, Craigslist. I wouldn't even bother. Second, option, you can use internal recruiters. So at some point, every startup hires a recruiting team to help them grow. There are 3 things to keep in mind. Firstly, it's going to cost you $10,000 to $15,000 per month to hire an experienced recruiter. It makes sense if you need to do a lot of hiring. It doesn't make sense if you need to hire 3 to 4 people in the next year. Second thing, most recruiters are specialized in one area. So knowing how to hire for go-to-market does not translate into knowing how to hire for engineering or product, and vice versa. The third thing, a lot of experienced people have left the industry. No one's had a worse time in the market since 2020 than internal recruiters. They were laid off en masse at the start of COVID. Then they had the hottest role in the recovery. They've since been cut to the bone in the last 2 years. A lot of people have simply left the industry. So then we get external recruiters, aka recruiting agencies. Next venture is a recruiting agency, right? So if that's you, there is a book a call link at the top. But let's talk about that as a model. So external recruiters typically charge a percentage of the first year base salary. Unlike software engineering, there isn't a culture of contracting with salespeople. They're typically hired as full-time permanent staff on day one. Recruiting agencies tend to operate under one of 2 separate models. So there's contingent, no win, no fee, and then there's retained, which is an upfront fee to start the search. Regardless of the model you pick, the amount of money you're going to pay is going to be about the same, assuming a successful hire. However, retained firms tend to close 90% or more of the searches they start. Contingent firms tend to close about 20% of the searches that they start. Why is that, you might be asking? Well, simply put, commitment goes both ways. Selling someone on a contingent recruiting arrangement is pretty easy. After all, as the hiring manager, you're basically getting a free lunch. Well, sort of, right? If a job is hard to fill, it'll get ignored in place for a job that is easy to fill. So a recruiter can only really work on 5 to 6 roles at a time, and that's really maxing it out. But contingent recruiters often have 15 to 20 jobs on their desk at any one time. Really what that means is they focus on the easiest 3 to 5 and put the rest in the too hard basket. So why your job might be in the too hard basket: low compensation, you're an unknown company, you're looking for a hard to find skill requirement. The odds are, if you're an early stage company, your jobs are in the too hard basket, which is why contingent agencies might not have worked for you in the past. Now, the problem with paying an upfront fee is that you're often spending $10,000, $20,000 to start a process, and there's really no guarantee of an outcome. You're not going to know if things are working out until 10 to 14 weeks down the line. Unless you've previously worked with a firm, or if you have a referral from someone you know and trust, picking a new recruiting agency is a big risk. So there's always the option of sourcing candidates yourself. This is pretty similar to prospecting on LinkedIn. You go on LinkedIn, you find candidates and you message them. You can do this if you have Sales Navigator, that's $100 a month. If you don't have Sales Navigator, look up Recruiter Lite, that's $170 a month. The workflow in Recruiter Lite is much better for finding candidates, and you can get a free month. If you sign up. I've actually got this video, it'll be linked in the description if you want to watch it. This is me finding a sales leader for OpenAI with Recruiter Lite. So if you are going to do that and you want to go outbound to candidates, you might be wondering, what should your messaging look like? Well, I've got a template for you. It gets 30 to 50% response rates. I'll have a link for that below as well. But maybe you might be thinking, are there any other options? Thankfully, yes. I have created an option. It's called 10 of the best. It's a way that you will speak to at least 10 candidates in the next 30 days, risk-free. And really, the secret to good recruiting, the secret to finding great people, is you just have to have a lot of conversation. So here's how 10 of the best work. There'll be a link below. In terms of process, we'll have a call to discuss the candidate profile you're trying to hire. In 5 business days or less, you receive 30 profiles that are a match for your requirement. You're also going to receive messaging that matches your employer value proposition. So that's that messaging I was talking about before. You're going to start sending emails and booking first calls with candidates. How much does it cost? It's $3,000 one time. There's no recurring charge on there. You might be asking, what if I don't get 10 interviews on the books? You will continue to receive profiles until you book 10 meetings. If you haven't booked 10 meetings within 30 days of purchasing, because we can't find the people, you'll get a full refund. What if the candidates that we get are not relevant? Well, we've got a try it twice or we'll make it right. So if you don't like the candidates that we send over, you'll get a second batch for free. If you're still unhappy, we'll just give you a full refund. Now you might be thinking, I don't want my company to be associated with insane recruiter messages. Well, we'll write the messaging for you, but you're going to send it. So you're going to be in complete control. So again, in the description, there will be a link if you want to talk about that. But moving on, what are the right qualifying questions to ask candidates, right? If I am talking to people. Well, there are really 3 aspects to this. I've done thousands of these calls. That candidate intro call takes about half an hour, and it should have 3 key purposes. So number 1, you want to work out if this candidate is a good prospect for you. The candidate is going to be working out if they're interested in working for you. And then thirdly, you're going to start just gaining that information that you're going to use later in the hiring process to close the candidate. So the first bit is understanding their role. And usually we want to do this for their last role and the role beforehand. So the questions we want to ask: what segment did they sell into? If you remember, we talked about the different types of account executives. We want to talk about what deal sizes look like in that segment. We want to talk about who the decision maker is. We want to talk about how long their sales cycles were. We want to talk about how they got new leads. The second thing we want to do is we want to understand where they want to go in their career. So we want to understand, what are they looking for in their next role? We want to talk about, what do they want to avoid in their next role? And we're going to zoom out, right? So where do you want to be in the next three to 5 years? And then finally, we want to understand, what are the compensation expectations that they have? We need to be a little bit careful about that because there are some legal ramifications, right? So in New York and California, 2 areas that I've done a lot of recruiting, you're not actually allowed to ask how much someone earned, but you just ask, hey, where do we need to be for something to be worth talking about? And in 80% of cases, they'll say, this is where I need to be. And then final question, location, or possibly they're fully remote. So that is how you hire your first salesperson. If you would like this done for you, there will be a link below. If you would like to talk about 10 of the best, again, that same link, we can talk about that. Otherwise, you should watch this video about how to hire great salespeople in 2024. I'll talk to you soon.